All right, everyone. Thanks for coming up tonight. This is CoinList Building Blocks. If you aren't familiar with CoinList, we are where the best digital assets go to run token sales and token distributions. And we also do hackathons now. So you might be aware we are running a hackathon with 0x at the moment. It's going incredibly well. Over 600 teams have signed up. A lot of different cool projects being submitted. But we're most well known for token sales. And as part of that, this is a really interesting topic for us because it's about community. And the community for CoinList is companies in this space. And we want to foster that community and help engage with them and develop it. And part of that is adding value to them beyond talking about token sales, because they only want to talk about token sales so much. And there's other interesting things to discuss in this space. So what I'm going to do is, quickly do a couple of show of hands on two different things. So one, I'm going to go down the line with the different projects that we have here. And it's good to just kind of know they're at various stages of their life cycle. Some have been live for a while, some are relatively new. But it will be good to know, hey, does everyone know, for instance, what Stellar is? Okay, Stellar, Maker. All right. Pretty good coverage. Enigma? Yeah, fans in the room. And then Nervos. Okay. So, not unsurprisingly, Stellar always had the most fans raised, maybe Maker. That's probably in the life cycle of them, live products that are mainnets are live. But the other question is, how many people in the room actually work in some capacity in community, have to manage a community, are thinking about starting a project and like, hey, how do I get started? Okay. And anyone looking for a job? Yeah, no one. All right. Well, let's get started now. I think the first question is, community's thrown around a lot in crypto. Everyone says, oh, you gotta have a community, you gotta, have a Telegram channel, you have to have Twitter. But it'd be great to go down the line and just ask the first one, like, how do you guys think, what is your community? Who are you trying to talk to? Who are your constituents? And we'll begin with that.
Hi, I just turned on the mic. Is that cool? I'll turn mine off.
All right, very cool.
Hi, my name is Zach. I'm at Stellar Development Foundation. And so I think this is a pretty interesting question because you have to look at the use cases, I think, for your specific technology and like what you're hoping to grow. And I think it depends on a lot of different factors. Obviously, there's all kinds of people in the space. You see traders, you see entrepreneurs, you see big businesses, or even just people that want to use an application to get something done. And so for us, we're constantly trying to balance those different uses or cases because these people are helping grow the network. So I mean, independent developers have been massive because they help us define the use case. So that's one of our main targets. Larger players that are able to integrate the network into their applications and into their systems. That's another major one. And just people who are interested in the technology. Our biggest champions right now are the users, the people that are actually downloading the applications that are being put out by our different partners and builders. And they're a very educated group. And yeah, so that's what I would say.
I apologize, but I didn't introduce you guys, so if you don't mind, my apologies again. When you catch the mic for the first time, you could intro yourself and where you're coming from.
Sure. My name is Richard Brown. I'm the head of community development at MakerDAO. The question is how I characterize our community. It's a tough one. I think that we're very lucky in that we have something that has captured people's imaginations with a stable coin and the CDP engine. So we run this gamut from people who are fascinated with complex systems. We have a huge third-party development following. People are building on our systems all the time. We've also been lucky enough to attract a significant demographic of people that are interested in analyzing and critiquing the system, which is something that we're big fans of as well. So a huge group of analysts, armchair analysts, that are trying to figure out what it is we're up to and whether it's a good idea or not, which is always a good read. What we produce is a stable coin. So our demographic is largely people that are looking to use that currency, and that's a pretty big use case. So the community is
introduce yourselves when we're doing it up top. Actually, you can still introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lisa. I also work at the Stellar Development Foundation with Zach, and it's interesting. So Zach is on the community side officially, and my title is I'm on the partnerships team. And it's definitely been a super interesting journey discovering how those things kind of intersect. And so, you know, my experience with the Stellar community was kind of doing the Stellar Roadshow and engaging with a lot of businesses that were not in our Reddit, we're not, you know, following our Twitter, we're not like thinking about lumens on a day-to-day basis, but we're interested in engaging with other businesses that wanted to work on Stellar. And so, you know, Zach and I have had a really interesting relationship, kind of talking about how these different communities intersect, how we kind of think of them holistically. You know, I definitely think in this space, sometimes being a fan gets conflated with being a community member, and I kind of think about how those different, very important, like there's no value assertion in that statement, but they're just like different types of people in our space, and they have different needs, and so what are we doing to kind of support the different needs of those people? But, you know, from my side, our community is at the core people who are using Stellar and also claiming that identity and making the community something that they also own.
Again. Okay, cool. So I'm Tor. I work at Enigma. Enigma does a bunch of privacy-related stuff, privacy solutions for blockchain, etc. My title is relevant to something that Zach was talking about. I'm the head of growth for Enigma. And for us, like the way that we define community is anybody that is associated with the growth of the project, the growth of the ecosystem, because it's something that feeds back on itself at every level of the community. And when we're describing all the people who are stakeholders with Enigma, it's all people who have a stake in seeing Enigma grow. And that could be the protocol, you know, it could be adoption of the protocol itself. It's also the growth, the healthy growth of the community. It's the growth of the network, you know, both in terms of like on-chain adoption, but also like the breadth of the node runner network. It's growth of awareness, you know, because we want, and it's growth of like seeing our values spread, because we have a lot of values that are tied up in this idea of, you know, individual privacy as a right and as a technology, you know, so our community is any of those stakeholders, honestly, and we change our messaging to serve the people that are members of these different sub-communities within our global community, because we want to give them the language to evangelize what we're trying to achieve. So it's very important how we communicate it, mostly because we want to talk to people on their terms, but we also want to help them talk about us in a language that's familiar to them and familiar to the communities that they're already coming from. Because everybody in one of our communities is coming from another community. They're all at an intersection. So our community kind of exists at a number of different intersections within Enigma and outside Enigma, and my job is just to understand all that and then help everybody work together to do the one thing we want to do, all of us, which is grow.
Hi everybody, my name is Toya. I am with the Nervals Foundation, and previously I worked for the Ethereum Foundation. How that started was our chief architect used to be a core dev at the Ethereum Foundation, and he wanted to start the Chinese community because we're a project based in China, and he wanted to involve. Back then, like nobody knew what Ethereum was, and then he, being a core dev, he wanted more people to get involved with Ethereum. So how I would define, well, I find in my personal experience, like running the Chinese Ethereum community, is that being a stakeholder has a very positive correlation with being a token holder. So I would say I define like most of your community member, or if they're actually your community member, and if you have a token, they're going to be your token holders.
So we have five people on the panel, and we're going to try to get through as many questions, and then also turn it over to you guys to ask questions as well. So if you're passionate about one of these, you know, jump ahead. So the first one is there's probably a lot of different ways to see the value that your community can drive. I'm curious, how you think about looking at, well, there's all this chatter going on, but how does that translate into the metrics that you guys care about as a protocol or a network? How does that translate over to the other side, or how do you measure it?
I'm holding this. I'll go first. Or I'll try to. Okay, here we go. So we're very clear about the metrics we care about internally because, like I said, they're growth metrics. They're all things we want to see, get bigger and get bigger sustainably. Like we don't want to see something like get 10 times bigger and then fall, 90%. That happens to some metrics, but those are not metrics we control. So I don't think about those, but I do think about like engagement metrics. So I would say we've got two main ways of tying the metrics of the project back to the activity of the community. One is through an ambassador program that we have that I manage, where we've got 50 people, 50 volunteers across 15 plus countries who we bring them into the core of the project. They work directly with our core team. We can communicate the metric clearly, and they take initiative to work on projects that they want to work on, whether it's development related or whether it's business development related or whether it's online awareness, things like that. Like these are people who have taken strong ownership because they're aligned with the values of the project. Maybe they hold the token, or maybe they're just they want to use the network, right? They want to run their own applications on the network. So we give them the tools to work with us, and then they have the confidence to know that they're impacting the metrics directly. And that creates like this cycle of engagement where they know they're impacting the metrics, they see the metrics change, and so they stay active. And the other way is just very, very clear, transparent, consistent communication about what our values are. And if everybody in the community can agree what your values are, it's never in question, like whether they're working together to achieve that value or not. If they don't know what it is, if they don't know what your metrics are, it gets confusing. So you have to be clear and consistent when you communicate with everybody in the community. The values and the metrics is the one thing you have to consistently communicate no matter who you're talking to, whether it's any one of the subgroups I mentioned. It's the consistency and it's the transparency.
I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to answer your question, but so basically, back in 2000, late 2015 or 2016, when I worked for Ethereum with the Chinese community, I struggled a lot feeling there isn't enough support coming from the Ethereum Foundation. Maybe if there was more programs available or more scholarship or ambassador support available, that the community would grow faster and better. And later on, when I went to Zug and Switzerland to actually work in the foundation, I also felt it was in the beginning, it was very shocking to me how little community scholarship was established, and how little work is actually done to provide more incentive for people to join the community. But then later on, when I reflected on those, I felt maybe it's not so bad a thing that nobody is. Maybe it's a sign of an organic sort of community that people are willing to join, without having provided incentives, economic incentives to actually work for this project. Maybe that ended up being beneficial, because I've seen definitely some projects trying to encourage dApps or developers or community organizers to run things for them, giving them scholarships and tokens and all these programs, but that none of those so far seem to be successful. A lot of people that basically attracts a lot of people with wrong kind of intentions, and they basically kind of benefit from those programs and don't say they're loyal to the community, and they'll end up benefiting community lives.
Actually, I can take that.
familiarized with the way that MakerDAO looks at its community, and we've done precisely what it is that you guys had trouble with, and it's a very difficult thing to do, is figuring out how to incentivize a community, how to return value and derive value out of it. So we take a bit more of a utilitarian view of our community as opposed to not a group of brand ambassadors or a club, I suppose, but it's more we've been lucky enough to find ourselves presented with a fantastically talented group of people, and it may sound a bit mercenary, but that talented group of people is a tremendously valuable resource, and it's part of our ethos to figure out ways to incentivize the community to do things for us and figure out ways that we can do things for the community as well. And that has involved some really tricky initiatives, like trying to encourage the community to generate content that's useful and sincere, and to encourage the community to build applications for the ecosystem or to run meetups for us in a way that is fair, but like I said, sincere. So that's primarily one of the goals that we heard.
Great. So you guys mentioned a few different topics, things that worked well or things that you didn't feel worked well, but if we could dive a little bit deeper there, and if you guys could maybe get into the weeds of this is a tactic we used that we thought was incredible, or try this and it failed miserably, don't do that if you have a project, avoid it at all costs.
We're looking for mea culpas here. Yeah, I can talk about one of the challenges we've had in the community in general from the beginning is that we've been very bad with education and onboarding. It's a challenge I think that most people in our space run into. Getting a product out the door, convincing people that it's useful, and also writing up all the associated documentation and tutorials and onboarding decks that are required to help people engage the ecosystem is a constant challenge, and that's something that we haven't been great about for the early parts of our history. And that's one of the things that the community development group does, is we've kind of determined that there's some really smart people out there that are interested in crypto in general and MakerDAO and other organizations like Enigma is one that I'm familiar with, and has really smart fans out there. People that are, I'm sure it's all good. And so leveraging that deep insight and that talent in the community, and finding people that are looking to become engaged anyways, and giving them a framework where they can get that kind of interaction with the organization, but also be compensated for it, is basically what I think. So I kind of turned that into a positive, but it came out of the challenge.
Okay, so
I think, do both of them now.
I think I can answer both of those questions pretty quickly. I think for me, the values side of things comes from whether or not people are still willing to give us feedback and be critical of the project. I think that tells so much about what's currently happening and whether people are actually still enthusiastic about it. I think some of the best things that we've taken away over the past year or the past several years is just feedback that people have come to us and said, hey, you can do this better, or we really, really, really want to do this thing. And they don't necessarily need to be compensated. They're not asking for compensation. They just want to feel empowered to do these things. And by giving them the opportunity and creating programs that help incentivize that, not from necessarily a financial perspective, but just by saying this person here has really gone above and beyond and created these tools for other people to use, it really goes a long way. And a lot of that comes through some of the critiques and feedback that you get from the community. Because if you're not listening and you're not hearing where you have problems, then you're not going to improve. And so I think that transitions into some of the areas that we've had problems is just regarding communication and helping people feel empowered. And so as time has grown on, we've really tried to incentivize more of these community programs that let people feel like they can take initiative and go out there and set up a meetup or build a resource database or a tool set for somebody as well.
That's a great point. A quiet community is something that's gone forward well with 10x.
To be clear, the reason why we decided to go with an unincentivized ambassador program, like no extrinsic motivators, was twofold. One is that we tried the alternative and it didn't work. And the other was that we realized that if you are promising somebody some sort of extrinsic motivation, they want to know what tasks need to be performed to receive that compensation. And then they'll want to repeat that task as many times as they can to receive that same compensation. And once they've completed the task and there is no more compensation to be had, they will leave. So why we have a volunteer program is because people are far more creative with the actions that they want to take, because there's no expectation that we have an expectation in mind for what they need to do. So they don't come in thinking we have all the answers, meaning they're much more open about their feedback, meaning they will be more critical of the project, but it also means that they will do things that we would have never thought to tell them to do. And all of those things have provided significant value to the project in ways that we could not have remotely foreseen. The only control that we have on the program now, because we don't have the extrinsic motivators, is we're extremely selective. And that's it, because it really does come down to like, who are the people you choose to keep closest to the project? And they will look around at each other, and if they see smart, committed people to their left and to their right, they know you're taking it seriously. And if they look left and right and they see somebody who's just there for the money, they know you didn't take it seriously, and they will disengage, and you will lose the best people and keep the worst.
I think what I have to say is kind of in line with like all of the speakers, what they've said. Like shining, maybe giving the right kind of people the spotlight is very important, because your basically reputation has like no to like very low to no liquidity, and if you want to be like very reputable within the community, like you kind of want to like build up. That's kind of if a lot of people are incentivized to have reputation in your community, and that you're able to sort of like provide that reputation and distinguish between the right kind of people and wrong kind of people, and that's very helpful in terms of retaining people who are incentivized by having the right kind of reputation.
Yes, there's probably a challenge that teams out here are thinking about is the life cycle of a token project from inception to mainnet live and building and developing and continuing to grow. Is how do you take the people that maybe joined early on and were thinking, okay, this is a opportunity for me to earn money and I'm really excited. This probably also goes in line with the market transition over the past year and a half. How have you seen that story evolve, the different people? Do you cater at all, or do you just kind of block out people that are more of your speculator types, or do you have a way to talk to them versus others? What's your strategy there?
Just put it down, sorry. Yeah, alright. So I guess just one observation from our experience is I definitely think, we have certain types of personas in our community. I mean, I think any type of business or organization has that. And certainly, when Stellar started, developers were our, bread and butter. I think there was interest from other types of tangential communities. We're mission oriented. I think, there in general is a lot of interest in financial inclusion, and that certainly drew an attention. But it was a technical community, right? It was a technical product that had been put out and that was being developed. And I think in the last year or so, as we've gone through our growth path, we began to see a more dominant persona, which was that of the entrepreneur. And that may be kind of small to medium-sized business. Sometimes it may be somebody internally at a large organization, but still has that same type of mindset or capability. And they began asking for more and for different things, right? And they wanted to meet other people within the Stellar ecosystem they could do business with. They wanted to be able to talk about the products that they were building and find talent in the ecosystem, or solve certain types of situations. And that developer community didn't disappear. It's still there, but this kind of like new personality or voice became, I think, something we became more aware of, but something we realized we needed to start designing around. So.
Thank you. The life cycle that you kind of described kind of matches up almost perfectly with sort of the life cycle of our project, because we raised our money, from our tokens generation like around the end of 2017, and raised $45 million in like the heat of the bull. And I was managing that community the entire time, predominantly like Telegram and Slack and whatever, at least when you think of community being the people you're engaging with most often. And what's extremely painful as somebody who's close with their own community is to watch people who the only way they knew how to interact with your project and support your vision and support your values, the only way they knew to do that was to hold your token. And for us to say consistently, like, we don't control markets, we have no control over any of this, and then see all those people suffer as a result, that's an extremely emotionally trying experience for anybody. Like it was for our entire team, it was for our entire community, and a lot of people left the community. And there's really just nothing that could have been done to prevent a large percentage of the community from disengaging. And some would blame the project, some would blame themselves, some would blame, YouTube influencers. It really doesn't matter where the blame falls. It's like, it was still like emotionally really difficult. So our strategy in terms of engaging the community has been to progressively just be honest about what we're all dealing with as a space, right? These are the challenges that almost every single project is facing. Everyone has the same challenges. And, some people are going to stick around because they really believe in the long-term trajectory of the project. Some people have been through enough pain and they won't do it again. And it's not my job to convince people that they should sign up for more pain if they're not willing to ride the waves with us as a project. That's not fair to ask of them. What we can do though is at least ourselves be open and honest and transparent and build that trust with the community, so the people who are left, the people who are still engaged in our community, have a lot of trust in our team. And now I think when we do deliver, because we're launching our protocol in the next quarter, that will be a lot more validating for them that they've been here. But in the meantime, it still promises, and it's really up to the team to deliver. The only thing you can do to retain people is deliver.
I think that Maker might be a bit unusual that we didn't see the same hype cycle with our token. It was sold privately to developers and other investors early on. There was no ICO, and it's been fairly under the radar ever since. We won't usually talk about the Maker token that much unless it's in context of voting in the governance process. So I think it's tough to say, but in many ways, the bear market was a good thing for the organization, because we attracted a lot of refugees from traditional organizations or token holders, because there's nothing that incentivizes an interest in stability than watching 90% of your token value evaporate. That's how I got involved. So I realized that this is ridiculous. How do you find stability in the system for people that Maker and bought them until they hired me? So there's been this, at first, once winter started setting in, fairly solid influx of new users and new interest, which began to explode in the last 3 or 4 months as people began to sort of accept the reality of what we're doing.
I used to analyze the back end stats for we have stats per subscriber and stuff. And there is definitely a very positive correlation between the number of people who are subscribing and the price. I remember having organized a Pi Day event in 2017. That's May 14th. And back then, I remember the Ether prize first hit probably 200 at that time. And the title for like the name we came up with the event is Ether became such and such. The prize, Ether prize became this, and it grew like 200-fold. What happened and what's next? And that's our topic. We talked about scalability for Ethereum and wallet and different like dApps in that talk. And that was 2017, and the prize grew, and the community grew like 10-fold, 20-fold in terms of numbers of people. So I think everybody who came into this community, they are all a little bit economically incentivized, but a lot of people end up, and so every time, and the price is very volatile, and every time when the price goes down, some people, they can't take it anymore and they leave the community. So and not everyone who enters because of because of Ether prize end up being a speculator. A lot of they become contributors, hoping the community would grow stronger, and they may end up like developing things and interacting with like other contributors who do various things.
So I'll ask one more question and then turn it over to all of you. So if you're a new team, maybe started today, you've seen a lot, what would be some of your top tips for getting started and doing things right from the beginning? So let's just consider it's a small team of developers. You've just been hired to manage marketing, community operations, basically everything, but community is one of those things. What are some key points you want to bring up and get started with right away?
I think from my perspective, so I'm assuming there's not a launch in this scenario yet, an official announcement? No. Okay, so I mean, I think if you're going to come in from the community side, one, you need to make sure you have resources to point people to. So if the devs are like, we're ready to launch tomorrow, and you have nothing to help people like educate themselves on it, you're going to fail completely. Because if you don't, you need the documentation, obviously, which devs always typically think about, but you also need like to how to explain a use case or how somebody can get involved in maybe evangelizing or doing anything else. And from there on, once you have those things, I would consider letting people contact you and just being present, because that's really the biggest thing, is that you're not going to foster a community if no one sees you. You'll have people that come in and they may have come in because of price or technology or whatever, but they'll leave very quickly if they don't feel like they're heard, going back to the previous thing that we've mentioned. So people will be your champions if you give them the tools to do so, and really just fostering that relationship and having resources for them to be that champion.
Yeah, I would ask as many questions as I could to the early users and really reflect on that. And I mean, if it was really my job to do community, I would look to go see where I could coach people for community, but like in a meaningful way, because I thought that there was like real overlap.
Coach from other projects?
Yeah, I mean, I would say where are people who already show that they're interested in these types of communities, and I would try and understand why, and then I would try to bring them to my project.
That's kind of a good point. I mean, there's not a lot of people in this space that, even now. So, like, having this knowledge is good.
My advice would be to set tone early and stick to it. Avoid any evidence of hype from the organization or from the community itself, and squash it immediately. Hype it generates empty calories, and those calories will go somewhere else when the hype fades, and that's not creating a long-term relationship. So I'd recommend setting tone, radical transparency, being an advocate for the community, I think, and making sure that you never treat your users as products, which is probably a larger conversation, but a lot of the people that are interested in this space that find it compelling are fleeing that kind of activity, that they don't want to be farmed for data, and they want to be treated as people and partners in an ecosystem. So those would be my advice.
And the thing fell off. I'll find it later. Oh, thank goodness. Yeah, I'm going to echo everything about availability, right? And the marriage of these two things that you guys have talked about is, you know, if you are constantly available and you're also consistently setting tone, nobody gets confused as to what the tone is. And as soon as you disappear, somebody will come to fill that void. And if it's not you in the early stages, you know, it's probably not going to be somebody that you want. It's somebody who's used to another project. And at the time we were launching, you know, every project was a hype project and there really wasn't a way around it, you know. It was a nightmare for me personally, but you know, the job is growth. The job is you want people to join your community. My job was basically to, you know, wrangle that and somehow with, you know, 10,000 people in one space and it's mob rule, how do you still set tone? Now it's considerably easier. And in the early stages of your project, it's considerably easier. So yes, if you're coming in from, you know, day one and you don't already have this massive community baked in, like, do everything you can to be available and set a consistent tone. And what I said earlier about like consistent messaging, the more you repeat that messaging, and this could be from having good materials that have consistent messaging in them, you're giving your community the tools to also repeat that messaging and it becomes a consistent cadence. And then nobody, again, gets confused around what do you do, what are your values, what is the tone of this community. And if everybody's getting the same message, then everyone in your community can be a storyteller for you. And everybody becomes the head of growth for the project.
Documentation is very important, and educational material very important. Tutorials, those are all very important. And also, I feel you need to give bullets to your event organizers. A lot of people, they like to organize events, and oftentimes there is a good topic or maybe giving bullets is kind of abstract, but a lot of like people who are running meetups, they also need sort of like good things to talk about. If there is nothing to talk about, obviously for meetups and communities and for like channels who are distributing information, there's nothing to talk about. Also I've often thought about like conflicts as maybe a catalyst for a better or more united community, sort of. Like I've always thought about the DAO incidents, like in the very beginning of Ethereum, like whether it ended up being a very good thing for Ethereum, that a lot of people had a sense of involvement. Everybody felt very involved when the community was collectively deciding on like what they're going to do for the DAO. And then I felt everybody who was involved then became sort of like a real community member, or like they had a sense of sort of ownership to the project. So maybe and create some way that people can feel that they have ownership. Yeah, great.
I'm sorry.
I said I was going to turn it over to you, but you all brought up something that I just have to dig in a little bit more on. Is your community has a sense of ownership, and they feel like they're part of the company, they are part of the protocol, the network, they believe in it, they're kind of dedicated a lot of themselves to it. But you're also in an office maybe, and you have Slack or some other communication channel, and you have to make decisions that can't always involve 1,000 people in that decision-making process. So I'm just curious like how you think about balancing where the community is allowed to get involved and when it makes sense to let somebody just have to make a decision. It's even in a small company of 15 employees, trying to involve everyone can lead to no decisions being made.
Yeah, I was afraid that somebody's gonna hand me this, because I can think of a great example of just that kind of thing. So I'll throw myself under the bus. We, Mick and I had a rather large investment from A16Z recently. I'm not a financial wizard and I don't walk the corridors of power, but I imagine that those kinds of deals are fairly involved processes. And I know that a team of people worked on it and were very happy with the way it worked out and sort of enthusiastically revealed that information to the community, hey, look what we did, and it wasn't well received because there's a dichotomy in the space where we talk about openness, we talk about community, we talk about DAOs. Maker is a DAO. But at the same time, there's people that need to make decisions and run businesses. You can't run a business by a committee. That committee has 8,000 people in it. So one of the things that we discovered is that radical transparency always. Admit when you made a mistake, learn from it, and talk to the community about what that mistake was. But also clearly delineate the lines of the decision-making process in your organization. If you're exposing levers to the community and buttons that they can press and mechanisms and frameworks they can use to press those buttons, make sure that they're very well understood. And also make sure that people understand that running a business is like a chat in the hallway, a decision needs to be made now and move on kind of thing. So make sure that your organizational structure is understood, and like I said, if you have a governance structure, that people know how that thing works and what kind of power it bestows.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is probably the number one problem that we struggle with, like on a nearly daily basis, because we're a privacy focused project, and so like what is our stance on the concept and meaning of privacy, but at the same time we're building an open source network, we're building a public permissionless protocol, so we need to always act in a way that's like consistent with the values that we claim to have. So one of those values is very much around sustainability, building something that's going to work in the long term. Another one is like individual empowerment and things like that. So if we created some sort of system where nobody in the community had a say and there was nothing that was exposed, no levers exposed to the community, there would be no engagement. And if we exposed all the levers at a very delicate stage of the project, everything would break. So it is a balance that you have to strike. And it's like you said, if your core value is radical transparency, you have to act by it at every opportunity. If one of ours is, individual ownership and accountability, like individually at the company, like we're out in the community, we'll talk about the decisions we've individually made. Ambassadors, like in that program that I described, individually make contributions to the project. They have clear ownership of the pieces of the project that they're building with. They know what they can own. If they want to own something else, they try to take ownership. And there's certain things that they just can't own. They can approach projects, but they can't make promises on behalf of Enigma. Only the project can make promises about its development timelines. And we try not to make too many of those either. So it is the hardest thing. There is no prescription. It is iterative. When you make a mistake, you better own up to it. Hopefully you don't make any mistakes, but it's completely impossible. So just be at every stage, like it's values at the center. If you're gonna screw up, take ownership, because I think I liked what you said, because I like the concept of liquidity, right? And like once your reputation is set, it's sticky. Reputations are not very liquid, and it only takes a few people losing trust in your project for everyone to kind of lose trust, and then the doors are closed and no one gets in, and anybody who's still inside is screaming to get out.
Okay, so sorry for that first question, but does anyone have some questions for the whole panel, cost to the people? I saw you raise your hand first.
So I was wondering, who are the different people in your community, like for example, miners or like keepers? How do you go about, or developers, and how do you go about incentivizing each of these different people?
Yeah, we have a lot. So I think we don't have miners. Is that turn on?
So that one turns off.
Hello? Okay. We don't have minors. But I think the way we think of it is more kind of like there's a few core communities within the Stellar community. There's certainly the developer community, and even within that, there's differentiation between core developers and I would say like more ecosystem developers, people building tools or other types of applications. We have community members, people who are actively building community resources, educational resources, documentation, very actively contribute to feedback and discussion about anything that's going on. And then we have the business community, and that is also a very real community. It's a metric that we use to understand engagement both in terms of transactors on the network and also, if you provide consultation services, if you're building an enterprise wallet, if you're doing any of those things, are you getting customers, right? Is that something where you're able to engage in that business community as well?
I've got a question about economic incentives. Toya said something earlier about kind of if people are there just for the money, that it doesn't really make sense. Well, what are other ways to incentivize the community? Like, would you give them events like this, swag, or like what's like your strategy in that?
Right, perhaps I was not being very clear. Being a Ethereum community member, I am and I was a token holder, and also the person, like the core dev who got me involved with Ethereum, he was also a token holder, and like nobody I knew was involved with Ethereum and was a community member, was not a token holder. So basically, we're all sort of incentivized that way, but also we all sort of believed in the intrinsic. Well, we bought into the story of Ether having intrinsic value, and also that's why basically we worked to build the community to try to get more people involved, and also we translated material into Chinese for a long period of time for free, and organized all these events. We promoted a lot of projects within China, Gnosis, MakerDAO, Status, and like all these various projects, or like did meetups. We did meetups for them for free. So I suppose, yeah, we, and the reason why we did that is because we wanted to, we want the Ethereum ecosystem to do good, to do well, to grow better. So that's not entirely unincentivized. But if you overdo it, or if you, I guess if you come up with programs that says if you build me a dApp, I would just give you $10,000. That at least empirically, from what I see, attracts a lot of people who are just there for the money, and they're not going to stay in their ecosystem. They're going to do some crappy dApps and leave.
Okay, yeah, I mean, and to say that we don't, like even us, that we don't incentivize is kind of a misnomer, because we have a mandate, we're a foundation, and our whole mandate is to distribute a majority of our lumens. And so we've experimented with all kinds of different programs for distribution, and we for years have had something called the Stellar Build Challenge. And early on, only the people that were participating were people that wanted to build on the network. But with the boom, you have to reevaluate programs like this, because everyone suddenly can just copy and paste some code to participate to try to to get something. And so as long as you have things clearly out there and you're able to work within those frameworks, I think incentives are fine. Just make sure that you're communicating when you need to change those, because we found, after the volume has increased of these developers coming in and not adding things that are beneficial, we can still use the same similar kind of program for distribution, but you just tweak it to make sure it's not a free-for-all. It's suddenly, okay, these are needs for the network, so build these tools specifically, and we can still reward you. Just, don't copy and paste open source stuff that other people have already done. So just like realigning consistently seems to go a long way.
And in contrast, we're not a foundation. We don't have that mandate, and we haven't really done an incentivized program. So I'll give you some concrete answers as to what you can do if you're not giving away money or money equivalents. And the way we approach it is why do people want money in the first place? It's why do you want it? Usually it's freedom. Why do people want to be, because they want to make their own choices. They want self-efficacy. They want a feeling of control and contribution. So the big value that we provide for ambassadors is that sense of control, that sense of ownership that they can have in a project that they don't get in their day jobs. A lot of our ambassadors don't work in the crypto space full time. They're not offered another project. One is a penetration tester, one is a Harvard sophomore, another one is a motorbike rider. I don't think that he gets paid for that, but it's all he talks about. And that's kind of the point, right? These are things that they can't do in their day-to-day that we're giving them the opportunity to do, and we give them resources. We give them educational resources about Enigma specifically, about privacy generally, about blockchain, decentralization generally. We make that material accessible to them, and then we walk them through it when we need to as a core team. The biggest value that we provide, and this is unincentivized, but it's an incentive, is access to people like them. It's a curated core community. People want not just what I'm saying about that feeling of self-efficacy, but they want that human connection with people like them who care about the things that they care about, that they have constant access to. And if you can curate that community for them in advance and then give them the permission to enter that community, immediately be welcomed by that community and contribute to that community, there is no better feeling in the world for them, and money can't buy it. So, and in fact, what we've experienced is that if you introduce money into that environment, you necessarily destroy it.
Maybe I can talk to that. I completely disagree. But so I mentioned earlier that we are intensely interested in incentivizing people in MakerDAO, and one of the things I should have clarified though is that it's enormously risky to attempt to incentivize activities or to push metrics or KPIs that somebody else in your organization might be interested in. So referral programs, sign up for X, register here, and paying people for that is a horrible, horrible idea. Those are purely empty calories, and I think that a lot of people are probably burned with plans like that in the past. What we do at MakerDAO is we incentivize our core, most motivated, highly engaged members with incentive programs and with frameworks. So if somebody is an analyst and they want to do a deep dive into some part of the economic structure of the DAI, that's an enormously valuable resource. And the fact that they're putting time and effort into our community and returning value back to our community is worth an honorarium as far as we're concerned. So we feel the same way when it comes to it's obviously far more complicated, but when it comes to building up the ecosystem itself, when it comes time to create tool sets, so it's not a copy and paste in a React app into a GitHub repo and we just hand out $50 or something. It's a very involved, there's people who can tell you how involved this is, process of going through milestones and roadmaps and what your target market is, all the rest of it. So we treat our most engaged community members sort of as this enormous pool of talented subcontractors that we're looking to reward and bring into the fold. With that kind of relationship, it's really good luck.
We also have a grant program.
I think we'll take one more question and then.
I just have a follow-up. Why not just hire subcontractors? That's sort of the mentality about how you actually consider the resources within your community.
Well, if I could hire 15 copywriters, I would, but I can't. So, and there's people that bring unique perspectives and unique skill sets, and some of these things take a great deal of time, and they don't necessarily want to transfer their IP over to us at the end of the day. So if somebody has a really interesting project that's going to benefit the ecosystem or create increased adoption of an emerging market or help a vulnerable population, and we can help out and also have this rising tide raises all boats kind of thing, it's enormously important for us.
That was a follow-up to one last full question. Andy.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. You were at a conference, so like something organized by someone else or consensus or whatever. What is effective for engaging your community? What do you do? Is it just giving talks? Is it put some events to the side? What works when you were at events by someone else?
I think, yeah, we like to get the people who are using the Stellar into a room together at major conferences and events. We also like to do like educational training things if it's something technical, but if it's a business conference, we try to make a really high quality event that's focused on networking. And a little trick that I've done as well that I think is useful is we kind of enforce 10 to 30-second introductions for everyone in the group. Because it's incredibly validating for you as a platform to have people say who they are and where they're from and that they're hanging out with you. But also it makes it so people know who else is there. I hate going to events and like not knowing who else is in the room and if I miss somebody interesting. So I think people generally find that valuable.
Sorry, I'll break the rule one final time. You've been raising your hand.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think the problem is that the word community, is sort of like a very limited narrative that we use. I mean, like ultimately what we're building is sort of like economies, and these networks represent more than just like technology and businesses, and it's about institutions. And so really the conversation should be more about governance and sort of also like how communities work between different networks. And like, not saying like that you do that, but like generally I think the sense in crypto is that the community is just used as a tool to like essentially like create network effects. So yeah, I just I don't know if you have some thoughts about that, but I think that's super important since like sort of like if you look at the historical role of like community capital, I mean, as we sort of shift from the hierarchies towards networks, I mean all these things are important to keep in mind. So I think I just encourage everyone to think deeper about these things. Since it's not just we're building technology to create more efficiencies, especially now as we've seen, sort of like altruism is not really prevalent in crypto as much, as we everyone likes to say, right? They're doing it for altruistic reasons. So I don't know. It's just some few thoughts. I think. I mean, I could talk about this a long time,
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely. I mean, I'm going to scale it back just a little bit, but if you can see the amount of internal conversation we have about even just open source philosophy inside of how we are working within that framework. We may be the maintainers of the Git repo, but like it's much more than that. We want to make sure that other people feel like they are part of this contribution and governance process. And it's vastly important just from that perspective. So like how that extends out further and further and further, even extends into how we handle business partnerships. It's great if somebody wants to build a product on our network, but it'd be even better if they want to build a product and also participate in consensus and set up a validating node and like really work to integrate in other networks. I mean, our platform specifically allows, assets to be anchored from anywhere, whether it's crypto or SkyMiles or whatever. So it starts with the open source philosophy and it just goes up from there. And I think it's super important. And it's something that a lot of people don't get to see unless they're really looking through, issues and participating in that. And it's something we're consistently trying to work on and making work.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's probably a beat that we should have hit a few more times in this talk, but the MakerDAO community is basically the entry point into the governance process. Today was a good example. The 4 hours of the day this morning was entirely devoted to governance, a public governance call, and planning for that with our CEO, our president, and 20 other people on the internet joined. So it's every day is about governance.
So no more questions, actually. Thank you so much for coming out, Zach, Lisa, Richard, Toya, especially 3 of our guests up here flew in from out of town to be with all of us. So special thanks to Zach, Richard, and Tor. Thanks for coming out. Hopefully you'll be out for the next one. We'll send out an email when we schedule that.